guys are like me and you're fascinated with successful people's stories, where did they, how did they get to this place of success? Where did they go to school? What was their childhood like? I know I've spent some time, like Wikipedia, like find someone in politics. What was their backstory? I want to know how they got to that place. But as I get older, I'm struggle with finding balance with work and family and my own research. How do you create this balance in your life? So I look to these successful people and I wonder, how did they get there? How do they do this? How do they balance their work life and their family life? So I look for inspiration, but also connection and community. And I found some of that here with AAUW. We've had several conversations this last year relating to this. So I'm honored that Dr. Martin was gracious enough to talk to us today to answer some of these questions. We all know Dr. Martin's story and history. But one of the things I admire most about Dr. Martin is her love of her family. And at many of the engagements that I've attended this last year, she always talks about her family as a source of her strength. And I admire that, and I am glad that she has the courage to talk about that in a place of business and education. So I'm excited that she has accepted our invitation to talk to us today and share with us her struggles and her joys of balancing that life and career. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. When I was asked to come and visit with you all, I was asked to limit my time as far as speaking is concerned so that we could have more of an interactive conversation. And so I'll lay the groundwork with just some thoughts, and then whatever makes you happy makes me happy, so you can fire away. Indeed, you know, I have often characterized my life as a series of leaps of faith. And for those of you who know me, you know that I'm very, very religious. And I do believe that God places you where he wants you, at the place that he wants you the most. And this is why I believe that this is my time at Fort Hays State University. Under normal situations, I shouldn't be standing here. There were people that, where they were candidates for this position, were actually sitting presidents. I was not. And as you all well know, in academia, you have a kind of a pecking order. So under man's law, you wonder, why is she here? And so I have to then go back to my values, to my faith, and know that this is where I'm supposed to be. And so, but that is part of a lifelong history for me. You all know that I was born in Cuba, and when the communist country closed the island, only my grandmother, my sister, and me were allowed to leave the island. And so my first leap of faith was really through my grandmother, when she decided that with only the clothes on our backs, that she would go ahead and go to Spain. She was my age. She was 50 years old. And she took a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old with not a penny to her name and nothing more than the clothes on our backs, not a suitcase, nothing. Just on a leap of faith, knowing that somebody would provide. And it was the nuns who she had helped before while in Cuba to build convents. And her family had helped for centuries in Spain in building convents throughout Spain that came to the airport. It was the nuns that actually gave us our first coat. It was the nuns that gave us a place, a roof over our heads. And we thought it was going to be a couple of months. It ended up being 10 years. And so imagine a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old growing up in a convent. Especially a convent that was about 350 years old, and everything in that convent was relics. So imagine running through the convents and the nuns, about 50 of them going, "Don't touch, don't look." But it was wonderful because, and then of course in Spain, the girls go to school with nuns and the boys with friars. So I lived in a convent and went to school in a convent. Oh, geez. And then of course 10 years later, my My family had still not been able to leave. So the American embassy told my grandmother maybe if we came to the States that we would be able to get the rest of the family out. So again, on a leap of faith, she decided to get up and leave and move to the States. She spoke what I term tourist English, enough to get by. And I and my sister did not speak a word of English. And so, like many of our students today, I went to school in high school, and I went to school full-time, and then I worked a full-time job. And then on Sundays, we'd get up in the morning, go to church, and then after church, we'd go to clean houses because it put food on the table. And, you know, my grandmother ever complained. Quite the opposite. She always talked about the fact that we were so fortunate to live in a country that we would be able to practice our religion, to speak what we needed to speak, and not to fear anything, and the fact that through education, anything and everything would be possible. And so that was kind of the beginning of my life. I went on to Duke, met my husband, John, a native of Virginia, freshman week, started dating by Christmas. 4 years later, we were married, and then moved on to Virginia. I have, for those of you who may know now, a 25-year-old daughter who's doing a PhD, doing research in autism at the University of Miami, and my son is an MBA at Wake Forest, and one's 25 and the other one's 21. We were 20 when we were married. My 25-year-old, even though she's going on 65, and my 21-year-old son, who's going on 11, they're no more ready to get married than the man in the moon, okay? But, you know, they're great kids, great students. They're just, it's different, you know? So it is finding part of that work-life self-balance. It's a discovery. And for me, my roots really were in my faith. And I saw it day after day after day through my grandmother. This wasn't something that was esoteric. This wasn't something that was theory. And perhaps that's why when I was a professor, the way that I taught, I normally taught, as you know, my background is in business. I normally taught the strategic management capstone course for both the undergraduate and the MBA. And I diverted away from the theory and geared to the practice. And perhaps part of that was my upbringing, because I saw my grandmother practice what she believed. And because I saw it and I lived it, it makes sense to me. So when I was teaching, it's one thing for me to tell a student, okay, so you're going to do a strategic plan on XYZ company in the back of the book. You know, I remember being that student. I remember thinking, why the heck am I spending an entire semester, you know, over 15 weeks, putting together this beautiful strategic plan, you know, and analyzing all of these data sets and putting forth all of these projections, when this professor is going to look at it for about 5 minutes and he's going to go, okay, there he goes. File it away. Whereas instead, I could be affording the opportunity to my students to realize life, to be part of life, to improve the human condition. And so we shifted it to an experiential learning so that my students, when I was teaching, we partner with small businesses and nonprofits. And so the students groups would go and interview the operator, would interview the CEO of that nonprofit. And then together through their intellect and their expertise, they would craft these strategic plans for these individuals. So they saw firsthand the value of their intellect. They saw firsthand the impact that they had on these businesses. And they saw firsthand how they could impact the human condition and the value of education. I've often said that for me, at least, education is futile were it not to improve the human condition. That's why we're put on the earth. And so that's part of, I think that the reason that I look at life like that is because I saw my grandmother live it. And for her, you know, I learned from her the meaning of work and the meaning of education and the meaning of sacrifice. I also learned from her the meaning of balance. And you know, for me to sit here and say to you, here's a template about life and work and balance, it's ridiculous, because what's true and beautiful for me is not true and beautiful for you. What works for me does not work for you. So really it's about finding that center in ourselves, that corner of our life, that corner in our souls, that is where we are happy, that we can find that relaxation. I work, my day is very long by normal standards. Maybe that's your standard, but my standard is perfectly normal. You know, for me, an 18, 20-hour day is normal. And no, I'm not tired, because, you know, while for some this may be work, it's not. You know, how fortunate I am to be able to spend time with faculty and staff and students. I mean, that's having my cake and eating it too. You know, I mean, stuff like that energizes me. Being able to go to see a donor, to tell them about all the exciting things that are going on at Fort Hays State University, that brightens up my life. That's not work. But yes, then there is part of work when I get home at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and that's answering emails. You know, and I have this pet peeve that if somebody sent me an email, it's because they needed an answer. And so if it's 2 a.m. in the morning when I finish answering emails, then so be it. And I do. And that doesn't mean that I expect anybody to answer an email at 2 a.m. in the morning, but I do. So it's finding that balance that makes you happy, that makes you find that self. And then at the end of the day, I do have time for me. And you know, whether it's at 10:30 at night or at midnight or at 2:30 in the morning that I finish sending out that very last email, my routine is then I go upstairs to my bedroom at the university house, take a shower, and then I spend the next half an hour praying the Rosary. I can't get to sleep. I can't unwind. That's my time to just kind of become centered in me. My life has been a leap of faith. I mean, it's coming 1,700 miles clear across the only place that I've called home for 32 years. My husband and I just celebrated our 33rd wedding anniversary. And for us, it worked. You know, we grew up together. We were 20 and we grew up together. For my 21-year-old going on 11, I don't suggest it, you know? I don't suggest it. But for us, it worked. You know, we also were a little bit different. We were more mature. I had been working all my life. We, you know, as my husband said once, by the time that we were my daughter's age, we already had a mortgage. We were working 2 jobs, and we had to put food on the table ourselves. We didn't rely on mommy and daddy, you know? So it's a little bit different. For us, it worked. But it worked also for me because I had someone alongside with me that embraced my dreams. And my dreams were his dreams, and his dreams were our dreams. And that's really important. You know, my grandmother, as I shared earlier, always valued and placed great importance on an education, especially in this country. And so even after we were married, she said, you need to go on and get your master's. You know, I was working 2 jobs. One was to make ends meet. The other one was to put a little bit of money away because we wanted to buy the first little house. You know, the American dream. Okay, and I'm going, yeah, we're in God's green earth, and I'm going to find time for this. You make time. You make time. And so, you know, it took me 6.5 years to get my MBA. But it's the best time to get it when you don't need it. It is. You don't need it. I started working in a bank. I didn't need it to keep my job. So, you know, 1 course at a time, I was able to go forward. But I needed to have that balance in the house. My husband, my partner, my friend, who was supportive of that career. And then the first child came, my daughter. And my grandmother said, you need to continue going to school. Well, were it not for my husband, I couldn't do that. What am I going to do? Just kind of bring the crying baby to school? You know, so you need to have that partner. And I think that's my message to you all today is, you know, dreams really are achievable. It's just you've got to find a partner that believes in those dreams, that they'll walk the journey with you. and I wouldn't be here were it not for my husband. You know, he runs a fourth-generation business in Virginia. He is what it's called in Virginia an FFV, First Families of Virginia. You know, if you go to Jamestown, there's a plaque on the wall of the first settlers, and there's a John Newton Martin. My husband's John Newton Martin. That's how long they've been in Virginia. And he, you know, I stayed behind the last 32 years because I felt that once the children came, it was my responsibility to give them my values, to teach them who we were. And it was also my responsibility and my duty, but also my privilege, to look after my in-laws and to look after my grandmother. The Spanish are taught that the circle of life in God's world is that the parents take care of the children, so the children take care of the parents. It's our duty, but it's also our privilege. And so we were the proverbial sandwich generation, with elderly parents and grandparents and with young children. And I felt very important, it was very important to give them roots. And so the roots were at home, and I left the bank and entered into my passion, which was academia, because I wanted to give them roots. And it was those roots that kept me in Virginia as long as they did. And so, but you have to have that, so I gave up part of my life, people would say. I don't think so. You know, I blinked. My son is 6'2". He's 21. I still call him little one. Okay? I blinked, and one day they were gone. So if people have asked me, you know, you could have been a president 5 years ago, 6 years ago, don't you regret it? No, not at all. Because I needed to look after my in-laws, because I needed to look after my grandmother, because I needed to be at my son's baseball game or football game or basketball game or at my daughter's gymnastics meet or at their academic reception. And I would not have been able to do that elsewhere. You know, so it's not a give or take, it's an and. And I do believe that life is a series of choices that we make. And I believe that we need to have the right person next to us to make those dreams a reality. And it is a give and take. It may not be today. It doesn't mean that it couldn't be tomorrow. You know, for me, it wasn't 6 years ago when that first person came to me and say, I'd like for you to apply to become a president. It wasn't my time. This is my time. This is my time at Fort Hays State. But then I have that partner, that friend that has willingly said, this is now, your dream is my dream. And I'm willing to go ahead and shut down everything and leave his home state of about 400 years, truly, okay, so that I can come with you and make a new home here. So you know, finding that balance, I can't tell you what it is. The advice that I can tell you is somewhere in the middle of the night where it's just you and yourself and your soul and your conscience, you need to look down at your heart. You need to look at what makes you happy. You need to know and look at how you want to spend the rest of your life and with whom and how. And, you know, and it is not going to be a bed of roses. Don't think that because, you know, you're a president or you're a dean or you're a professor, all the problems of the world have been lifted. Quite the opposite. You now have responsibilities for the livelihood, and I take it very seriously, of close to 1,000 employees and 14,210 students. Okay? But you know, it comes with great joy because you're able to make an impact, but you also have challenges. So you have to believe that you're here for a reason, and that when those challenges will come, that people will stand to support you, that this is not my fight, this is our fight, that this is not my vision, that this is our vision, that this is not my dream, that this is our dream. And in doing all of that's where we find the balance, because we have the confidence to say, I trust you, Linda, here, get it done. I don't need to do it. That's the balance. Or I'm able to say, yes, absolutely, I'm going to come here because I don't care if I have to be up until 2 a.m. this morning doing emails. This energizes me and gives me the strength, gives me the energy, gives me the enthusiasm to be able to stay up until 2 o'clock to do the mundane work. And yes, the job's not done until the paperwork is done. You know, so that's kind of the foundation, if you would. And as far as what I look at life and at balance and how I look at life, and so I'll open it up to see what questions you might have. I sucked the air out of the room again. Yes, ma'am.
So, Henrietta from Joseph. So I was wondering when I listened to you, if you would say more that the work-life balance is more a state of mind than something that you actually do, than some specific guidelines, than more something that happens in your mindset.
You know, that's a really good question. I think it's a combination. I think you need to make time to do things that are of value to you. So you need to identify first your values. You know, so I'll tell you a quick story for that answer. In Virginia, my son was an All-American. He played basketball, baseball, and football. And so he was playing sport year-round. You know, I didn't have a reprieve. And so I loved what I did in that university because I was with faculty, I was with staff, I was with students, and I would have just assumed spending the day there. But being part of that family, it's a responsibility and it's a desire. And so I had to carve time to say, okay, going to a baseball game in 9th grade, okay, but it was important because it's my child, it's my family, and it's a sense of unity. It's part of a support mechanism. This lady travels all the time following the football team because her son, Drew, is on the football team. You know, it affects her life. It affected mine as far as sacrifice, but it's something that we do because we want to be there for our children. And so there were times that I will profess I wasn't there for 100% of the time. 9 innings can take 4 hours. Okay? And this was before the time of iPads, okay? So it was dead time, okay? So I may choose not to stay there the 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 doubleheader times, but I always came, okay? The same thing with basketball and football. And I remember often saying to my son, to my husband, Patrick never knew I was here. But I would say to myself, but I knew. So Patrick was honored at in his senior year because he ended up being captain, and he had been one of a handful of students in the over 100-year history of that prep school that had been on honor roll and done all 3 sports and become academic. And so Patrick gets up, and here's a 17-year-old who gets up in front of a large, great big room, and he talks about the fact that, you know, I want to thank all of you who give me this opportunity, but I want to thank my parents. He said, my father was always there, and he says, and I know that my mom wanted to be longer at my games, but I am thankful because I know she came to each one of them. You know, and I turned to my husband and I said, and he said, I told you he noticed. Okay? So you've got to carve time, and they need to match your values, and they need to match your state of mind. You know, my time, you know, you could think of, okay, so the praying of the Rosary, for those of you who are not Catholics, they're beads and you pray them. It is a mechanical process, okay? But in that process, for me, it's a conversation, it's a state of mind, it's a shutting out of the external environment and concentrating on the internal. So the mechanics becomes a state of mind. Does that make sense?
Yes.
What other question? Yes, sir.
We heard a lot about your grandma,
Yes.
about grandfather and parents.
Unfortunately, none of the family was able to leave. They all died in Cuba. When we came to the States, my mother and two brothers were the only two that were allowed to leave. My grandfathers died in Cuba, my aunts died in Cuba, my uncles died in Cuba. My grandfathers both died. My father's the only one who remains. And he's able to leave the island normally for 3 months once a year. And I was very fortunate that he was able to leave last year during the time of my inauguration. So he was able to partake of that. He was never at my wedding. He was never at my graduation. He was never at my children's birth. He was never at my children's graduation. But he was at my inauguration. So we celebrate what we can get. But no, nobody. I have memories of them, and obviously through the stories of my grandmothers, both said paternal and maternal, were able to leave. But my grandmother was my father, mother, sister, brother, a mentor. She was that beacon, and I was very fortunate. But I know that's one of the reasons that I came to Fort Hays, because family is so important, and I was looking for family. I was looking for that extended family, that joy to see the students be able to walk across the stage and graduate and think, I knew him or I knew her. To see that faculty member or that staff, that's family for me, and that's why I talk about family, and that's why I talk about the family of Fort Hays State University. And I feel very strongly that I have found that family. It's not a cliche, this is not something that's insincere. Somebody asked me the other day, so if something were to happen to you tomorrow, what do you think would be your legacy? And I said, well, I think that I would like to think that people would say that we had a strong, well-managed, and well-led institution that's fiduciarily responsible, where excellence prevails, and where people are encouraged and inspired to improve the human condition by being part of a great big family. And I think the shift that I have seen this year, I walk the campus, I go into the classrooms, I hug the students, I see the smiles on people's faces. I see the willingness to become one. I see the interaction, and when I call for help, it's everybody comes to the rescue. That's what family do. We may agree to disagree. We may not see everything the same way. But when somebody needs help, we come to the rescue. We've seen that just in the last couple of weeks with, our family member whose husband and wife were part of this Fort Hays State University family, and she had the stroke, and the outpouring of support for this young couple, of the entire family, has been second to none in gifts of money, in gifts of time, in gifts of looking after the children, in gifts of just preparing something to eat, in gifts of opening a home so that he doesn't have to stay in a couch in Kansas City. You talk about tigers helping tigers. That's what family is. And that's who we really are, and that's who I believe we have become. And so that for me is critical. And my grandmother was my family, and she was it. By the time I went away to Duke was when my mother and two brothers came. So I don't know them. My mother I know you better than I know my mother. And it's the truth. I went to Duke. I came back. I never really came back home because during the summers I stayed at Duke to work full time. I had a job there, like many of our kids do here, who don't go home because they have a full-time job here and they don't have one in their hometowns. I stayed at Duke because I had a full-time job there. And so I never really went back home other than to put on a white dress and to walk down the aisle.
You got married in Cuba?
No, I got married in Miami Beach at the St. Patrick's Cathedral. That was home. No,
Close it
no. But my father was not there either. So my grandmother was my father. So yes, ma'am.
So you work in a very male-dominated field.
Yeah.
Right, so I'm wondering, in your experiences as an administrator, even going back to your previous work, do you think it's been more of a struggle for you, or you're treated differently because your path was perhaps a little bit different?
Yeah. Yes. When I started my banking career, I ended up being a senior vice president in charge of commercial lending for the second largest bank in the United States at the time. I was the only female. And I would walk into a room like this, and all of you would be gentlemen. And I don't like what happened when I walked into a room at Fort Hays State University 15 months ago. And I walked up and I said, ladies and gentlemen, and I went, oops, nope, gentlemen. When I was younger, when I was doing my master's, I guess it was in the 80s, there was a seminal work and I still remember, by a faculty member called Patricia Schwartz. And she wrote a seminal article called The Mommy Track. And the Mommy Track said, ladies, there are two tracks in the world. You can be a mommy, and if you do, forget about work. Or you can be an administrator, and if you do, forget about family. And I will tell you that many of my colleagues who had gone to school, who were climbing the corporate ladder, did just that. They went ahead and they said, I can't climb corporate ladder, I need to take care of my family. And I stepped out of the workforce, and all of that brain drain came out. And then they became mommies. And those who ended up in this side of the equation, that they wanted to be administrators, didn't have children. I have seldom done what people have told me I have to do. When somebody says to me, you can't do it, then I find a back door. And I was told, you can't do it. You cannot be a senior vice president and have a family. You just can't do it. And you find a back door. You find a way to get it done. And yes, it may take you longer, and you may have to work for it harder, and you may have sacrifices, but you find a way to get it done. And so I did. I was fortunate again. I had a husband at the house who was able to walk next to me. But, it's being a female and being normally younger by 10, 15, 20 years. It's like, hi, honey. Oh, here comes the little girl. Okay. Or if I would be walking into a room with a gentleman, and whomever didn't know me, they'd go, hello, gentlemen. Very nice to see you, Mr. Vice President. And they would go, no, actually, she's my boss. It doesn't make it right or wrong. I think that we learn from those opportunities. I think that it affords us the opportunity to shift the paradigm. It affords us the opportunity to say to others, this is how you can do it. And I do believe that the paradigm is shifting. I mean, my daughter, the students here at Fort Hays, they don't think either or. They don't. My daughter doesn't think, can I have a family or do I have to have a career? It's part of who they are. And I'd like to think that individuals like you all, like me, perhaps created a little bit of a path that now this next generation can come and expand it even more, and then the next one will come and expand it even more. I think, though, that you also have to have, when you get there, you need to have a conscientious commitment to open doors and to inspire those who, by culture, do not believe that in their female roles they can achieve, they can do what the males are doing. Having said that, the same thing is true on the other side, in that, gentlemen, I applaud you. You know, when I was growing up, my husband would not have been seen all that masculine had he stayed home to be the babysitter, to take care of the children. It wasn't done. Today, that's acceptable. You know, it's a conversation, though. It's who has the greatest potential. Okay, so I have the greatest potential. Okay, you're going to stay home and take care of the children, and that's perfectly fine. You know, but we have to have those, I think, those conversations. I do think that it is still more difficult still for a female in administration. I think there are biases of, you know, we show strength and we show emotion differently. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong, it's not better or worse, it's just differently. You know, for me, I cry. I cry. You know, you may put your fist through a wall. I cry, okay? Okay? You know, you put your fist through a wall, that may be perceived as being aggressive. I cry, it's perceived as being weak. Okay? It's not, you know, it takes a far stronger person to be able to show emotion, to have the confidence to show emotion, than it does one who doesn't. And so it's changing the norms, the acceptable norms of how do we recognize behavior. And so we're not there yet, and it's something that I try to maintain a certain decorum, and if I get upset, then, and it's not upset, it may just be, I'm happy, you know, and I tear up, or I'm sad because I've lost a good friend, you know, like yesterday when I went to Carolyn Bird's funeral. You know, you just can't help but sit there and know the impact that she made on so many hundreds of lives, and not feel sorry that she's not with us. And for me, it's a source. So we've got to begin where I think that we need to go next is establishing an acceptable set of norms that are not cookie cutter. You know, when I started, there were the leadership. People talked about leadership as feminine leadership, and that was, you know, it was leadership, and then it was feminine leadership, and the feminine leadership seemed to be less because it was about those things that were identified with women: nurturing, caring, loving, compassionate, sympathetic, good listener, empathetic, you know, and those were perceived as almost being weak traits. And thus they were called feminine leadership traits. Now, there's been a shift. You know, it's okay for a leader to be compassionate. It's okay for a leader to be a good listener. It's okay for a leader to be empathetic. Not just a female, but also their qualities and traits expected of male leaders. So that paradigm, those set of norms have shifted. Well, our behaviors, our emotion are not there yet. And I think we need to educate people.
That's why you're here.
It's not just me, it's all of us. It's all of us. It's all of you. You're the next generation. You need to stand tall and say, I am woman, hear me roar. Yes, ma'am.
Were there any struggles in your early professional life that as you went on in your career it became easier to navigate through?
You know, as a 20-year-old, when I entered the banking industry in the mid-'80s, back then I was the first management trainee with a college degree that the bank had hired. The banking industry, it was common that you would graduate from high school and then you'd go on to college, to the bank, and then you would grow up. You know, the president of the bank only had a BS. So here you are, somebody who's coming out and already has a BS, so I'm at the same level educationally as is that president. And I can't tell you how often people said to me, stop going to school, you don't need it. Why are you sacrificing yourself? Why are you not spending time with your husband? I thought you said that family was important to you. And so a struggle I remember was just trying to find those values of, well, you know, family is important, and I'm spending 1 night a week going to school and 1 night a week in the library and 1 night a week doing homework because, yes, we didn't have internet. So you had to sit in the stacks, and I had to open the books and have the dust of the ages shower me. Okay? And you do. You get to a point where you begin to doubt, and you begin to say, is it just lip that family is a value? And if it is, then why am I doing this? So that was the skepticism of people who wanted to just, in a way, I'm not even suggesting that they were doing it for anything other than just, I don't have a degree, you already have a degree, you're already on a path up, why are you spending this? You know, the opportunity cost. I think that was a struggle. My accent was always a struggle. You know, now it's gotten much better, but I mean, remember when I was married, I hadn't been in this country for very long. So you could cut my accent with a knife. And then, of course, I started learning English in Carolina, so half of the English I learned has a Carolinian hick to it. You know, so it's thick Spanish with a Carolinian hick, and I don't look Spanish, so it's like, where do you come from, Mars? You know? Of course, you know, 30 years later in Virginia, between the Carolinian hick and the Virginia Southern, we're really in trouble. When I get going, you know, that comes out. But you know, that was a challenge. The accent was a challenge, and being able to showcase that despite the accent, there was ability and intellect. If I had a penny for every time I had people say to me, so where do you work? I work at a university. You're the secretary. No, I'm a faculty member. Oh, really? You have a master's? No, actually, I have a PhD. Oh, you must have a PhD in Spanish. No, actually, I have a PhD in English in strategic management. Really? I'd be a billionaire with a B. That was a struggle, you know, trying to surpass that stereotypical. And again, I was younger than most faculty. I didn't have necessarily, when I went into academia, the traditional path, because I had been in an executive, and then I had come into academia, so I was 30 years old, not 20 years old, you know, and I was talking about all of these mergers and acquisitions that were not in a book because I had created them. You know, again, it was a shift. I think it's just coming into your own self and just, at the end of the day, to thy own self be true. And you have to. You need to. When I used to be a faculty member and I would talk about the importance of vision, vision is like the North Star. My husband and I used to, in Virginia, he was a sailor, had a catamaran, so we'd like to go sailing, and that North Star guides the travels of the sailors. You never quite can reach the star, but it guides your travels. So I used the same metaphor when I used to teach about a vision, that we all need to have that compass, that North Star that guides us. Now that doesn't mean it's going to be a straight and narrow path. So that North Star says when you're going this way one day, the North Star's over here, but that's guiding you. And the next day you're going this way, but the North Star's over here, but that's guiding you. And when I talk to students, I would say to them, forget about getting stuck in a job. What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be an architect. I want to be a banker. Forget the names. Look into your heart and say, what do you really like to do? Do you like to be with people? Because if you do, it's one thing. If you don't, it's another job. Do you like to help people? Do you like to cut into people? Because if you don't like blood, maybe you shouldn't be a doctor, okay? But you need to look at that very basic levels of what makes you tick. That's your North Star. And then the rest comes in. And I really do believe that it was that upbringing, that need to pass it forward. I remember going to bed hungry because there was no food. That's something that you don't forget. I remember leaving Cuba. There was a movie some years back that I watched once, and I've never since watched, because it brought forward memories that I had suppressed. And I remember being 6 years old, and when the permit came and being stuck in, it was called a fishbowl, because those who were leaving Cuba were stuck inside this fishbowl. And we were told to get there like 8 hours before the plane would leave, and on the other side of the glass was the family. So even the last minutes you couldn't stay together. I remember that. I've had a toe amputated on my feet, because you only had one set of shoes every 2 years, and you were a child, so the shoe was this size, so that your foot would grow, and you would stuff it with paper, but of course, after a couple of hours, the paper would get small, and so my feet developed like this, and I finally had to have 3 sets of operations to break all the bones to straighten them. But some of them didn't work, so I had to have some amputated. Those are life experiences that shape who you are. It was a teacher in high school who believed in me and showed me when to apply for the SAT, when to figure out what college to go to. It was that teacher who wrote a check. It's because that check I got to Duke. Because of that check, I'm here. It's my time to pass it forward. That's what gets me up in the morning. That's why I'm here. And it's those life experiences, it's those sacrifices, it's in that face of adversity that you grow, that I grew. I think the trick, though, is never forget. Never forget where you came from. And if you don't, then you use that to turn back and to give somebody a hand up, not out, up. And there's quite a bit of a difference. Okay.
We have time for one more question. I have one.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you keep up your confidence in the face of pessimism and chauvinism?
I get grounded on my North Star. I have, I believe in the power of prayer. I believe in the power of conviction. I believe in doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. My leadership style, I think, is perhaps a little bit different in that I am very much of a bottom-up person for top-down support type of philosophy. I don't consider myself being an expert in everything. I have expertise in my field. And I believe in hiring individuals who complement my strengths, but hiring talent, hiring excellence, hiring people who know far more than I could ever know about their expert field. And I don't have any issue in saying, so what's your opinion? And we may have a discussion, but at the end of the day, if it's an expertise that lies with you and not with me, whatever makes you happy makes me happy. So I think my confidence is drawn in the knowledge that I have an incredible cadre of expert individuals that surround me. And if I don't have them around me, I can find them in the staff and in the faculty. And I believe at the core of who I am that because we have engendered a culture of trust, and for me, without trust, we have nothing. But because we have engendered a culture of trust, I'm not being weak by saying, I don't know. Linda knows, let's go ask Linda. And I think in that knowledge, in the knowledge that we have such an incredible body of knowledge and that I can tap it, gives me confidence. I'm not alone. I may not know about this, but I know somebody who knows about this, and I don't have any issue in asking that somebody, what is this? And then saying, okay, well, that's what your expert advice is, then that's what I have to follow, because I have two choices. If I've hired you and you're the expert, and I come to you and I say, so what do you think? And you say, well, this is what I think. And then I say, well, that's very nice, goodbye, and I do whatever I please. Then it's either two things. Either I'm a fool, I don't think I'm a fool, or I don't trust you because you don't have the expertise. And if you don't have the expertise, then you shouldn't be in your position, and I shouldn't be asking you. So it's establishing that culture of trust. I need to know that I can trust you. You need to know that you can trust me. I need to know that when I come to you, your expert advice is going to be devoid of a hidden agenda. It's going to be what's true and right for our university, for this situation, for whatever it may be. And so, you know, I think there's a difference between being cocky and being confident. Cocky means I know it all, and I know better, and I don't. And I'll be the first one to say, I admit I made a mistake. And I've told you all, you know, with this re-engineering, there's an awful lot of balls up in the air. You know, that we've gone very far, very quickly. Thank you, Laura, very miraculously, relatively, very well. But eventually, we will make a mistake because it's just too much of an enterprise not to, especially when you have 14,210 students and close to 1,000 faculty and staff. But I will be the first one to say I admit I made a mistake. But I draw confidence from you, from your experiences, from your expertise, from your intellect. I draw confidence from her. I draw confidence from her. I draw confidence from her. I draw confidence from them. You know, I can't operate those cameras back there, but if I need to, I know I can pick up the phone and call Andy and say, hey, I need your help, and he's going to make me look real good. Okay? So that's, you know, and that's part of that balance. It's finding that, you know, at the risk of using the cliche, we're only as weak as that weakest link. So if I surround myself with strength and we've created a culture of trust, a family where trust is pervasive, then how can we not succeed? You know? And besides, I'm the eternal optimist. The glass is always half full. Otherwise, I mean, why go through life looking at the glass half empty? You know, you got to have a smile on your face. Otherwise, you know, if you don't love what you're doing, if you don't find passion, if you don't get up every morning and say, thank you, Lord, because I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing, there's the door. Go find that job, that career that makes you get up every morning and say that. And that doesn't mean that every day you're not going to find a challenge and that you're not going to come and want to put your fist through that wall. Okay? It isn't. But that's part of life. It's that adversity, and then you get up in the next morning, and maybe you get up through the other side of the bed. And you say, today's going to be a great day. And you go forward, and with the hope, with the realization, with the belief, with the confidence that somewhere along the way, unbeknownst to you, you're going to make a difference in somebody's life. And you'll never know that, but that person will know it. That's why I'm here. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.